Also, the slides will be uploaded to our website, so you'll be able to view them again. So you don't need to take any hard notes during the session, and focus on the slides. So what will be covered today? We start introducing EU CBAM. We begin to understand its scope and which sectors are included before moving on to the different stages and its rollout. I'll then cover the key responsibilities for businesses, followed by reporting requirements and our suggested approach for a robust reporting methodology and that need to be applied. After that, we look at the latest updates on the EU framework, and I will highlight some of the main challenges and red flag that organizations should be aware of. And finally, in the second part, we will have a quick look on the upcoming UK CBAM, and I'll share what we know so far about its development, and then finish by highlighting the key difference between the two mechanisms. A brief introduction about the chamber. We are officially the largest accredited UK Chamber of Commerce, accredited by BCC, the British Chamber of Commerce. We have 3,500 members and a wider network of 35,000 organizations, and we represent about 1/3 of the total workforce in the Greater Manchester. And we are not just a city centre body, we have a physical presence across all the 10 local authorities in the area, from Bolton to Stockport, which allow us to provide a world-class support from PR and policy representation to our Global Connect network, which links our local members to partner in over 150 countries. What we can support. We specialize in the niche field of customs. Everything involves moving goods in and out the UK is what we do every day. Because of that, CBAM fit perfectly as it falls directly within our expertise. At the moment, we are already on the ground assisting UK clients on navigating this new implementation as we speak. Our support are obviously first consultancy. We don't just give you a manual and rules to follow. We provide expert guidance. We can help you navigate the complexity and the fine print, including the topic of today, which is CBAM, and to ensure your specific supply chain is covered. Secondly, training. Knowledge is your best defense. We offer both bespoke and off-the-shelf training programs. These aren't just theoretically topics. We can offer world-class compliance for your import and export teams. Declaration. This is the practical side of the international trade. We have a brokerage system and where we can handle the actual administrative burden. We take care of the customs and transit declaration, so you can focus on running your business while we handle the paperwork. And we can help you on getting pay service and letter of credit. We have a team in the export documentation that can support with the UK Certificate of Origin, UR1 and ATA Connect. And finally, market entry service, where in case you are looking for a new partner supplier overseas to expand your business. Sorry. Just a second. So now, if you need more details on how we can support, please visit our website or drop us an email. You are able to send me a message in the chat or our contact details are available inside the slides. So let's come back to the topic of today. Let's start first introducing the CBAM. CBAM is the carbon border adjustment mechanism that the EU introduced. This is a mechanism applies to goods that are carbon intensive in their production. And what it tries to do is price the carbon that is emitted during the production. The idea behind the scheme is to encourage cleaner industrial production in non-EU countries. This is the reason why mechanism kicks in when non-EU products cross the border. The declaration that the EU is expecting is that the importers will have to declare how much carbon they are introducing into the Union, and depending on the relative weight of the carbon compared to other products, they may have to pay a tax. So the product is scope in the EU CBAM, and for the moment, let's focus on the fact that we are talking about the EU version of the scheme at the moment, because there is another coming soon. In fact, the UK is implementing a parallel scheme in 2027, but we will cover this later on. So for the moment, for this stage, let's focus on the EU CBAM and why UK exporter should be informed and aware of this scheme. So we mentioned that the EU CBAM is already in place, therefore urges UK manufacturers, fabricators, exporter, supply EU customer to get prepared. The categories in scope fall into iron and steel, aluminium, fertilizer, hydrogen, and cement. While these are just categories, we all understand that they are governed by a very specific list of commodity codes, which is the most important concept to understand. So takeaway number one from this session is we look at the commodity codes being imported into Europe to decide whether your products are in scope or not. Now, because this is a quite brand new scheme, is being introduced in stages. So we had a phased approach from 2023 when it started to 2026 when the transitional period ended. During the transitional period, all the EU did is collecting data. In short, no European importer paid any money. Taxes were not paid yet. It sounds like a test stage. And the reason was simple. The EU collected data to check that the scheme works as intended. The first reporting period ended in January 2024, and importers continue to reporting on their imports on a quarterly basis. In July 24, the rule changed and regarding the default values. What are default values? Are standard values that can be declared in the absence of real measurement or calculation. The EU understood that the companies were not ready with data measurement initially, at least, so they allowed the use of this standard data. However, at the end of July 2024, the ability to use the full data officially ended, and as a compromise, because the market were still not fully ready, the EU currently allowing up 20% of the provided values to be based on default or estimated data, or data that has not been properly calculated. And this has remained, honestly, one of the most controversial point of the CBAM. Next, the transitional period ending in 2026. From that point, real payment must be made. That is when financial impact will truly be felt. Even before then, European importers were being pressured by EU to submit reports and as accurately as possible. And they cannot do this without information from the supplier, in this case, UK suppliers, which is where the regulation is producer and processor in the UK. And I understand this is why the reason you are attending as a UK manufacturer exporter the webinar today. So we are now learned why UK exporters are under pressure to provide figures to their European customer. However, this is what we define a commercial responsibility. Technically, a UK company is not under the jurisdiction of the European Union because the UK is now a third country. Therefore, regulation doesn't apply legally to a UK company. So you, as a UK supplier, exporter, you are not legally forced to provide data, but it applies from a commercial point of view. The UK company needs to provide information to satisfy their client in Europe. So as exporter, what are your responsibilities? You need to provide figures and a list of products with the resulting combined nomenclature or CM code. Explain the production routes. Declare emission expressed in ton of CO2 equivalent per ton of products. That's it, really. You don't need to do anything else. And I understand that it sounds a lot easier than it actually is, but that is the extent of the exporter responsibilities. If you are a EU importer of the records, you must submit a formal report to the European Union declaring how much carbon you are importing. There is an immense amount of guidance, hundreds of pages, and on how to do this, including reporting templates, guidelines. I'm not sure if you already seen those terrible spreadsheets. They are all available in the EU platform. I will share the link at the end of the slides where you can find all this information. But honestly, it's not a straightforward process because, as we like to remind people, this is essentially a tax return. There are clear regulations that must be followed, which leads to significant confusion regarding roles and duties. Now, I want to little mention when you, as a UK exporter, selling under DDP. When you sell under DDP terms, if the UK party takes the responsibility of the importer of the record, they become liable for making the CBAM declaration in Europe. So you can do that by establishing Europe. You have a company established in Europe and you act as the importer of the record. You must complete a full CBAM declaration and you need to be registered in the CBAM registry. Or alternative, you may appoint a fiscal representation. If you are using a fiscal representative in Europe, you will have to complete the CBAM declaration. If you're using a fiscal representative, the representative will have to complete the CBAM declaration on your behalf. And we assume that will be a recharge arrangement. So any tax or duty they pay is recharged to you. So to finish this topic, DDP was already complicated. CBAM adds a further layer of complexity to those arrangements. So let's focus on the parties involved in this mechanism. The EU CBAM applies to goods imported into the EU, and as a consequence, is applied to all the parties involved in the supply chain and the import of these products. This included manufacturers, UK manufacturers in this case, of the actual goods covered under the measure. Exporters, you might be not the manufacturer, but just a UK exporter to the EU. And also involves the EU importers, who are usually referred as declarants under the CBAM regime. And this also involves a customs broker and authorized representative who might handle the procedures for the importer or the exporter or the manufacturer more generally. So now let's focus on our suggested approach on reporting methodology. We mentioned our reporting methodology, and one of the things that UK exporters should keep in mind is compliance. So it's not enough to simply provide a set of numbers, but it's important that you as an exporter or manufacturer you have a report methodology in place where you document the approach you take to calculate your CBAM emissions and explain the data behind the figures. Remember, all the data you are providing, they will be audited at some point, and therefore you must be ready to justify, and you must have a strong and robust backup evidence of these figures. So let's have a look at some terminology when we're talking about reporting methodology. We need to understand the difference between producer and processor. We need to understand if you are actually a producer or processor of the main products. For example, you are forging a metal or creating fertilizer from scratch, or you are processing a bar of metal and turning into screws and bolts. There is a significant difference between the two. And then the second challenge is to understanding which goods are in scope. We must identify the products you are purchasing, the precursor, the material you are adding, and the resulting products of your process. CBAM is quite strict. You cannot simply calculate emission from the specific screw you are exporting to Europe, ignore whatever happened before you acquire or purchase the actual product. Also, we have to look at the entire facility and understand its boundaries. This includes what you are doing in-house and what you are outsourcing. If, for example, another company handles your galvanizing or different parts of the process, we need to understand how that impacts in the final products. We also must select a sensible reporting period by reviewing financial records, production data, stock inventory, and energy consumption. This is a very delicate process, and we need to be strategic about the period we choose. Also, data collection is a major pain point. We must collect data from your own process and your suppliers. If you buy metal bars, for example, and they come with an embedded emissions, we must understand what is coming in and what we are adding on it. Also, emission apportioning. This involves the technical calculation of emission apportioning. Specific rule dictate how to aggregate or disaggregate products and production processes. We need to think strategically to ensure the figures are accurate and capable of standing up to an eventual compliance audit. Possibly this slide is perhaps the most important part of this presentation, especially if you are an European importer, because European importers start paying taxes based on the weight of the carbon reported. Your product as a UK exporter may become more or less commercially attractive and more or less expensive, simply based on how it was manufactured. So we must be extremely careful in how we report this information. And yeah, basically this is our suggested approach for a robust reporting methodology. Now, the important question is, where does the information coming from? Step one is facility production data. You will need to be able to interrogate financial data and IRP data to understand what you have processed in a reporting period. Then we need to consider the energy consumption information, all the source of energy, whether you buy them off the grid or whether you make your own. For example, you might have a solar panel or an alternative green energy. That would need to be accounted for. Last but not least, precursor information that is actually linked to the products you are bringing into your factory. Now, I want to cover another reason of confusion within UK exporter, but also EU importer. The de minimis threshold limit. The EU uses what they call de minimis exemption. Think about de minimis this as the too small to be bothered with rule. For the definitive phase, we are now in the limit sets of 50 tons per year of total net mass of CBAM goods. If you are an importer, the total imports of the year stays under 50 ton of CBAM goods, you are generally out of the CBAM scope. However, for high-impact sectors like hydrogen and electricity, this limit or threshold is often effectively zero. So this is where I need you to pay a bit more attention, because this is the number one area where companies are getting confused right now. I often hear UK exporters say, I only send 10 tons of steel to my client in Germany, for example, so I'm under the 50-ton limit, right? The answer is not necessarily, depends. Remember, CBAM is a responsibility of the authorized CBAM declarant in Europe, so the importer. You might only be sending 10 tons to your client in Germany, but the same importer might be buying 20 tons from a supplier in China, for example, another 30 tons from a supplier in Turkey. So from the perspective of the EU customs, they don't look at your 10 tons in isolation. They look at the importer's total aggregate for the year. So if your customer total volume across the global supplier is 51 tons, every single gram you send them is now subject to CBAM reporting a cost. So you don't just need to assume that you are exempt just because your individual shipment are small. You must communicate with your importers to understand if their total volume triggers the requirement. So a couple of important updates regarding the EU CBAM. At the moment, the EU is thinking to expand the CBAM scope beyond basic material like steel and aluminum. The mechanism is set to cover approximately under 80 downstream products. This may include industrial machinery, transport equipment like cargo vehicles, and even consumer goods like washing machine and furniture. So it's important that you stay updated with the upcoming extension of the CBAM scope. Also, the European Commission has published the first CBAM certificate price at 75.36 per ton of CO2, giving the companies an early indication of future carbon costs on imports on the EU. So the price is based on the EU carbon market and will be updated quarterly in 2026 before moving to weekly updates from 2027. Although importers, we only need to start by certificates. So this is something that it's for the EU importers. This is not relevant for UK exporter unless they are shipping DDP. The actual amount companies pay will depend on the emission data they report, with the verified data potentially lowering costs compared to default values. Overall, this marks a shift from simple reporting to real financial impact, increasing pressure to exporter to reduce emissions. So I just want to pick up and highlight a couple of things we've seen with our clients when helping them with the new CBAM regulation and calculation. Is my HS code is scope? We see different types of business. Some do very little to the products in the UK. They are what we define merchants. They buy products from around the world, stock them here, and sell them to clients in Europe. Then we have customers who do a lot more. They might buy raw materials like steel bars and transform them into widgets or another end products. When those end products fall within the CBAM scope, they get worried because they suddenly fall under the regulation. So the most important thing is the HS code. I like to take a moment to really stress this. We have done consultancy, and as soon as the commodity code became clear, we could compare whether the products were in the scope or not. So to keep it short, it doesn't matter what the material go into final products. It doesn't matter if you use steel or any other commodity in the CBAM scope. What defines whether you are within the CBAM scope is the resulting commodity code, the final product after the processing and the transformation. For example, we see clients that makes electronic box. The larger part of the box is actually metal. If they sold the empty metal box, they will indeed fall under the CBAM scope. However, once the code moves into 84 category, which is not in the CBAM scope, even though there is a steel inside, the resulting code is exempt. So classification should be your bread and butter. If you are sure about HS code, the classification, double check, ask for help. We are ready to help, just double check that the final product is actually in the scope of the mechanism. The other interesting point and challenge we see within our client is that the burden of proof for CBAM lies with the EU importer. This is so important, and EU regulation cannot be enforced on a UK company. So the UK exporter doesn't have any legal responsibility, but as we seen before, they have a commercial responsibility. So as a UK business, we don't have a legal responsibility to Europe, but we have a commercial responsibility to our customer there. If we don't provide information, we become less attractive as a supplier. So we must provide data to allow the EU importer to comply with the regulation. We also seen challenges in the supply chain. We are seeing business oppose this regulation because it's perceived as an additional red tape that slow down the process. We help business who have essentially been threatened by European clients asking to provide information, or you are out of the supply chain. And also my final point involves the burden of proof. A European importer turns to the UK business and demands data. If the UK business isn't manufacturing, if they are just buying the screws or metal box from elsewhere, they might struggle to get that information from their own supplier. So while you can still report and provide data with the default values, these can often carry higher costs. Furthermore, using the default value can look bad for a UK business, as simply implies the calculation are just an estimate, even it's not entirely a default. So there is still a lot of confusion regarding CBAM. We are still at the initial stage, and so here we are year 12, and this presentation is just a bit an insight to help you to understand what's going on at the moment. Finally, keep in mind that once the threshold is crossed, the importer must be an authorized, the EU importer must be an authorized CBAM declarant. You can just show up at the border and pay the fine, paying the amount you owe. You have to be registered in the system. The timeline for the registration was the 31st of March. So if you are a UK exporter, please check with your client in Europe that they are registered as a CBAM declarant. Sorry, I just lost the slide. So now let's have a look at the UK CBAM and how the UK approached to this new mechanism. And remember, this is going live in January 2027. Unlike the EU, the UK is skipping the practice run. We are going straight to the financial system. This means now for UK companies, from New Year's Day 2027, you will start owning money if your goods are in scope. So for the first year, you report annually with your first payment due in May 2028. After that, it moves to a quarterly system, so you need to stay on top of your data. What is covered? The UK list is slightly shorter than the EU sectors. For now, glass, ceramics, and electricity are not included. Everything else is very similar to the EU sectors. So this is a good news for UK companies. But I will say the biggest win for small business is that the £50,000 threshold is the total value of your imports. So basically, if you are importing less than £50,000 of CBAM products, essentially you don't need to be worried about UK CBAM at all. This is much more simpler value-based test compared to the EU weight limits. Another difference between UK CBAM, EU CBAM, and how do you pay for the CBAM. So you don't need to buy carbon certificates or credits. The UK CBAM is a simple tax. You pay straight to HMRC. You will manage through your existing government gateway account in the same way you are currently pay VAT or duty. And my main advice on this is that even though the first payment is in due until 2028, your data collection must be ready by January 2027. So if you don't have an accurate data on your emission, HMRC will charge you as a default rate. They will purposely set this rate very high, so it's much cheaper to have your own data ready than to rely on HMRC default data. So let's have a quick look on the main difference between the EU CBAM and the upcoming UK CBAM. The most fundamental difference is how the money actually moves. In the EU, you are participating in a sort of carbon market. You have to buy certificates that mirror the weekly price of carbon. It's dynamic and can be different every quarter. The UK has opted for a much simpler tax model. There are no certificates to buy. You can just calculate what you have and pay directly to HMRC, similar to how you handle customs and duty or VAT. Threshold. This is where business need to check their data. The EU is triggered by weights. So the threshold is 50 tons per year. It's a very low bar designed to basically catch everyone. The UK, however, use a value threshold of £50,000. This is a huge win for small importers. If you're importing specialized volume or low value steel parts, you might be completely exempt in the UK, even if you're fully liable for the same goods in Europe. In terms of timing, the EU has settled into annual declaration cycle. The UK started with an annual return for the first year, which is 2027, but be prepared from 2028 onwards, it shifts to quarterly. This means your cash flow and data reporting will need to be much more faster in the UK system than the EU CBAM. Also, the scope is a bit different. Electricity and hydrogen are currently out of the CBAM scope in the UK. The UK has left the electricity out for now. So this is another good news for UK companies. Yeah, if you take one thing away from this slide, basically the UK system should be a bit easier to calculate, but the EU system is harder to avoid. In terms of resources, here's there is your practical toolkit. These tools are designed by the EU to take compliance easier for you as a EU importer, or also for a UK exporter to understand a bit more about this regulation. You can find the communication template. This is a must-have Excel file, those complicated, terrible spreadsheet I mentioned earlier. exporter use this to send data to EU customers in the exact form they need it. You can find sector webinars. These are recorded video. If you need to understand a specific rule for things like steel or cement, you can start from here. You can also find the EU registry. This is the official website where importers file the reports and manage the carbon certificates. You can also find a self-assessment tool. This is a quick interactive check. You can use this to see if your goods are covered by the rules and what you need to do. So you can find all this information on the official EU portal. You can find the link at the bottom of the slide, and I believe this is the best place to find the correct information about the CBAM mechanism. So we see now how difficult and controversial this mechanism can be, especially because it's a quite new implementation and it's already live. So this is why we urge our clients to take action now and find a real partner to navigate this. And you should really get an expert support. So why you should get an expert support? Because handled correctly, CBAM becomes your competitive advantage. And here are 4 ways we can help you. We can provide you with verified data. We ensure your information is 100% compliant, so your goods don't get stuck at the border. Easy to trading. We provided the right data upfront, makes life easier for your EU customer, keeping your trade lines open. Lower costs. We help you to find a way to cut emissions. Greener products mean a lower tax bill when importing in EU, making you and your product more attractive and competitive. Finally, getting ready for the EU CBAM now means you'll be fully prepared when the UK CBAM will be launched in 2027. So in short, we handle the red tape so you can focus in growing your business. So if you're feeling a bit overwhelmed about CBAM and after this presentation is totally fine. We understand that it's very complicated. So if you're not sure where to begin, we prepared a CBAM health check. You can access this by clicking the link here or simply scan the QR code on the screen with your phone. It only takes a minute, but it will give you a clear picture of exactly what your next steps should be. So I think it's everything for the moment. I'm gonna check if there are some questions or whether I suggest you, especially if there are questions regarding your business, your specific product, I suggest you to get in touch with me or via the health check so we can check your specific case